My question is to the Premier. Last week I visited SUNTECH greenhouses with owner Bob Mitchell. Bob's a good man. He is a proud farmer, and he is known in Ottawa for his little miracles in Manotick. But between the Liberal green energy tax, the
Stop. No. Start, Bob. The Leader of the Third Party is warned. Please finish.
The HST, the new carbon tax, the Liberal green energy tax, and all the waste in energy from cancelled gas plants to power lines to nowhere mean that Bob's cucumbers and his tomatoes are 30% more expensive than his Mexican counterparts. He couldn't even run his lights this past winter to grow his beefsteak tomatoes. Liberal energy policy is doing its best to put Bob out of business. And what does he hear from the Liberal government? He hears from the PA of the Minister of Energy, who says it's humidity, not energy prices, that are forcing greenhouses down south. Bob and every other greenhouse grower in Ontario deserves an answer from this government. Will they phase in the burden of the cap and trade, and will they ensure that these farmers have an ability to make their profits?
I would ask the member to sit when I stand. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to thank the member for that question, because the greenhouse growers throughout the province are an important part of our economy, Mr. Speaker. I know the Minister of Agriculture does great work with them as well, and we met with them several times, Mr. Speaker, to talk about what are the programs that are out there, Mr. Speaker, that actually help our greenhouse growers. And, Mr. Speaker, the greenhouse growers were thrilled, Mr. Speaker. They were thrilled with the fact that we actually introduced the ICI program and dropped it from 3 megawatts, Mr. Speaker, to 1 megawatts, Mr. Speaker, because many of those greenhouse growers, they actually can now apply and qualify for the ICI program, Mr. Speaker, which will allow the greenhouse growers and any other business that is part of the ICI program drop their bills by up to 1/3, Mr. Speaker. And that is significant for many of these greenhouse growers right across the province, and many of those companies as well that can benefit from the ICI program. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? The Ontario Fair Hydro Plan dropped that even further from 1 megawatt to 500 kilowatts, so more businesses can apply.
Supplementary.
Well, that's simply not true. That's a counter to everything that Bob Mitchell told me. I met with Dwight Foster of North Gore Grains. He owns the largest grain elevator operation in Eastern Ontario, and Fernando Medeiros of Carlton Mushrooms. What you're telling me today is simply not true. Like SUNTECH, all of them produce quality food. They employ dozens, if not hundreds, of people, but the Liberal energy policies of this government over the past decade are continuing to hurt them. The Liberal PA to Energy was clearly told by Jim Demina, President and CEO of Red Sun Farms, last week, humidity, that's not a deal breaker. The cost of energy is a deal breaker. Will the Premier stop handing out glossy flyers, self-congratulating yourself, and actually do something for the grain growers of this province and the people that are operating
Please. There's two issues in what just happened. The second time I have to tell the member when I stand, you sit. If that's the case, you may be costing your party a question, because I can skip a rotation if it continues. Number two, you were dangerously close to making an accusation that is not permissible and unparliamentary. I would remind the members, all members, that you cannot do indirectly what you cannot do directly. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know they don't like to hear the fact that the ICI program actually lowers bills by 1/3, but that is true, Mr. Speaker. And there are thousands of businesses that are actually taking this government up and doing just that. But, Mr. Speaker, the opposition is overlooking some great examples of greenhouses that are choosing to base their future right here in Ontario, Mr. Speaker. I'm particularly pleased with the recent announcement that Greenhell Produces plan to invest up to $100 million, Mr. Speaker, to develop, $100 million to develop a 100-acre greenhouse in Chatham, Kent, adding up to 300 jobs in this province, Mr. Speaker. That is just one example of many, Mr. Speaker, and we're continuing through the Minister of Economic Development and Growth, through the great work of the Minister of Agriculture, and through the great work and leadership of this Premier to make sure that we continue to build this province up and make us the most competitive in North America.